Victor Bout, who was convicted on arms trafficking charges by the US and then freed at a 2022 prisoner swap. And all this according to the Wall Street Journal, which suggests he's trying to help sell arms to Yemen's Houthis. He's saying this is all fake. The article cited Bout as saying it appeared to be published to coincide with Russian President Vladimir Putin's birthday on Monday, and also praising the Iran-backed Houthis for what he cast as their military achievements. Those are the words of Victor Bout.
This was the moment Victor Bout returned to Russia in 2022, following his release from the United States. The man, dubbed the Merchant of Death, saw his 25-year prison sentence cut short after the two countries agreed a prisoner swap. A Russian's arms dealer for a US basketball player. Brittany Griner was able to return to her home country 10 months after she was arrested in Moscow for possessing cannabis oil. Now, almost 2 years after his release, Victor Bout is said to be back in business. The Wall Street Journal states he reportedly brokered a $10 million deal for AK-74S assault rifles with Houthi representatives, under the cover of pesticides and vehicle sales in Moscow. The Kremlin spokesperson has responded by saying that the story published by the American newspaper seemed to be false. The man who's said to have inspired the film Lord of War was arrested in a sting operation in 2008, having sold weapons across the world to both rebels and governments in Africa, South America and the Middle East. The latest shipments could reach the Houthi rebels in Yemen this month, passing as food supplies. Since being released from prison, Victor Bout has entered politics, joining a pro-Kremlin far-right party. It's unknown whether the deal has been negotiated under the Kremlin's commands.
Let's bring in Samuel Rahmani from the Royal United Services Institute for the analysis on this one. Samuel, good evening to you. What's your take on what's happened here?
Well, I think that it's not so surprising that Victor Bout, given his history, would want to dive in and get into a high-risk conflict zone. Most of his previous experience was in Africa, but he did obviously have some history working in the Middle East, in particular with the manager of Sharjah International Airport in the UAE and their free trade zone. The MENA region is known to him. And also this comes at a moment in time where Russia is contemplating sending missiles to the Houthis as retaliation for the Ukrainians getting permission from NATO countries to fire long-range missiles on Russian targets.
So all this, of course, has been denied by Moscow, just as they denied before invading Ukraine that they were planning to do that. So I think perhaps we take what Moscow says with a pinch of salt. What is it really saying about Russia's involvement in the conflict happening in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, obviously the Russians would deny this. There are also reports that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman actually vetoed any possible Russian arms transfers to the Houthis when Putin visited Riyadh late last year. So it's possible that the Russians are obviously treading cautiously on this because they don't want to offend Saudi Arabia, a key partner in the OPEC Plus deal, as well as a country that is still willing to trade and invest in the Russian economy. So I don't think it's really a done deal that the Russians will supply arms to the Houthis, but it's definitely something that the Russians are threatening, perhaps as a scare tactic against the West, particularly the United States, to encourage more long-range missile strikes in Russian territory.
Indeed. One wonders, though, perhaps whether Russia has the kind of supplies that you might need to sell to other countries, given its engagement in Ukraine, given it needs to have that ammunition, and given we've heard of shortages and obviously North Korea filling the gap, Iran filling the gap.
Well, definitely. Obviously, Russia is getting Wazak-11 missiles from North Korea. They're also in the cusp of, or props actually received, according to reports last month, missiles from Iran. And even though their domestic supply chains have managed to reconfigure some of those Iskanders, some of those precision missiles, and they managed to get enough chips to be able to produce them, which is something that maybe 2 years ago we thought would have been difficult, they still obviously have critical supply shortages. That's why I don't think that the Russians, even if they were to do this, they would send a large number of missiles. They might just send a small number to make a point and use them in attacks on Western vessels to scare the West. So I think this is much more a symbolic and demonstrative display rather than a strategic commitment to align with the Houthis.
I hear what you're saying. The denial from Dmitry Peskov just seemed to be along a line of many denials that he's made as Kremlin press secretary, which, again, we take with a pinch of salt. I'm wondering about Victor Bout. This is a character who clearly has had his finger in many pies in terms of supplying arms to whoever wanted to buy them in that sense. What does he do? Does he operate sort of independently, or is he very much an agent of the Kremlin?
Well, it's really hard to say what he's doing now because we just haven't seen enough of what his recent activities have been since the exit of prison. We do know that he's politically involved with the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is nothing like its name. It's a very extreme right-wing nationalist party. And he has been, engaging with other figures in Prigozhin's network. For example, him and Maxim Shugalay met at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg and discussed cooperation. So he's certainly working with people who have access to the GRU or to the Kremlin. But and on this deal, given the sensitivity of it with Saudi Arabia, I think that it's unlikely he'd be pursuing this deal without some kind of Kremlin sanction. By the 90s, he was very much a freelancer, operating independently and just selling arms for profit. Because Russia, in most of the countries where he operated, really did not have a strategic commitment one way or another. They weren't that concerned about what was happening in Liberia or DRC back in those days.
It's kind of hard to imagine that Vladimir Putin would let somebody operate like that on a freelance basis, though.
Yeah, not anymore. That's why I think, particularly with the experience of Prigozhin, and even though Prigozhin was never really a freelancer, he was always an offshoot of the GRU and the Wagner base in Molokino and the GRU Special Forces, were training together. Any autonomy in the sphere of private security or arms has been seen as something quite dangerous since the Wagner mutiny, particularly if the person is of an ultra-nationalist variety like Bout is. That's why I think Bout will be much more supervised this time around if he's doing deals than he was in the 90s and 2000s.
Hear what you're saying completely, Samuel. So this really aligns Russia, as if there was any doubt, with Iran and other groups against Israel on the ground in the Middle East there. Are we likely to see the threat that Israel faces increase significantly as a result of Victor Bout's activities?
Well, Russia wants to align itself with Iran against Israel, I think, at this point. And that's pretty clear with Israel striking Syria without really consulting with the Russians anymore. But does not necessarily want to align Russia with the Houthis against Dubai or the UAE, I guess, and Saudi Arabia. So they have to tread a very difficult line. I think certainly access to Russian missiles might help them on the margin strike Israel. But I think that, again, if any missiles are shipped, it's going to be a small quantity. It's going to probably be aimed at Western ships. And the Houthis have more than enough Iranian produce to wreak some damage on Israeli ports like Eilat.
Samuel Romani, as always, thank you very much for bringing your analysis to our studio. We always appreciate it. Samuel Romani of the Royal United Services Institute. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Very much.
Next, Florida.